Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the 2022 gubernatorial races in the United States. We're going to be talking about many races today that many have come as a shock to us, that have flipped recently, maybe more likely to go one way than the other here in the last few weeks. And we're going to be looking at that, specifically how these races are going to play out across the country. Races like Kansas, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, even Pennsylvania, Georgia. Other races that might be closer than people may have expected. And we're going to be talking about that today. There's 36 races happening just about 4 weeks from now. We will have the midterm cycle. I'm filming this on Tuesday. It will upload on Wednesday. So we're just about roughly 4 weeks out from the November elections, exactly from the day that I'm filming this. So I think it's really important to look at these races and see where many of them stand going just about 4 weeks out from the elections, and see how accurate these results and poll numbers were compared to right before the election. I mean, if we look at Virginia poll numbers, let me look it up really fast. If we look up 2021, the Virginia gubernatorial election, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you all remember this race that I covered last year, we can look down at polls. Sorry, give me just a minute to get here. And we will be able to tell that Terry McAuliffe performed very well up until the very until Glenn Youngkin started performing better after a debate when Terry McAuliffe said that he didn't believe parents should be a part of their children's education. And ever since then, Terry McAuliffe went downhill. Now, obviously, even in October, late October, in many cases, in some cases at least, Terry McAuliffe was still expected to win, but he didn't. If we go back up to the final results, Glenn Youngkin won by 2 percentage points. Pretty solid victory for him in Virginia last year. We're going to see how accurate those results may be to this year's midterm cycle. So let's go ahead and start in today's video. Today we're going to start by categorizing states that are automatically probably going to go to the Democratic or Republican Party. I mean, if we look at states such as these, we see overall that it's expected that they go to the Democrats or Republicans in whichever case that may be. If we look even states like Massachusetts, where currently they do have a Republican governor, not expected for the Republicans to win that race again. A totally different candidate, and end result is probably going to end up with the Democrats flipping that race. Let's look at Maryland as well, where there currently is a Democratic incumbent that cannot run for, or a Republican, incumbent that cannot run for re-election. It's expected that Westmore, who is the Democratic nominee, will win by well over 15 percentage points. But if we look at some of these other races for the Republicans, I also forgot to categorize Hawaii as well. Obviously expected to go to the Democratic Party in that race as well. But if we look at other races that are expected to go to the GOP, we're going to be looking at states like Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, not Kansas. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Texas, Oklahoma, maybe not fully Texas, though. If we look at poll numbers, I don't know that it's really expected to go to Greg Abbott by this magnificent margin for him. But if we look at states like Iowa, Arkansas, Tennessee as well, we're going to see that it's expected for the Republicans to perform very well in these states. I mean, if we look at Ohio as well, expected for the incumbent Mike DeWine to win that race by well over 15 percentage points. South Carolina being also one of those races. But then we start looking at states like Georgia and Florida, where there are closer races but are still expected to go to their respective parties. But we're going to be talking about specific races and many of these. Sorry, I also forgot to categorize Illinois, which is going to be a race that Darren Bailey has been in the race for quite some time now. he won the nomination with President Trump's endorsement. And ultimately, it's just not expected that he wins this race. I do believe J.B. Pritzker will win it, and I believe it'll be a very solid victory for J.B. Pritzker as well. But we do have races such as Oregon, Nevada, Arizona. I mean, if we look at many of these races, we have a lot that we're going to talk about, a lot that we're going to discuss. Also forgot to categorize Alaska. I apologize about that. But we have many races that we're going to discuss, and if you were wondering why there's so many still left on here, that's the simple answer to that is because these races are only going to be won by 15 plus percentage points. So many of these races you'd think, oh, that's going to go to the Democrats, that's going to go to the Republicans, and you would be correct in most circumstances, but we're going to be specifically looking at what kind of numbers we think are going to be the final result here in these states. So let's go ahead and start with Maine. If we look at Maine, we can see that the incumbent, Governor Mills, is expected to win this race. 93% chance given on 538, expected to win by a pretty solid victory. Roughly around, not exactly, but around 10 percentage points. So pretty solid victory for Mills, and it's expected that that they win out on a likely margin. If we look at New Hampshire and Vermont, both states probably going to go to the Republicans on pretty solid, safe margins. Probably should have characterized those earlier in the video. I apologize about that. But I do think these are two interesting races. Maybe not so much New Hampshire, but Vermont for sure. And not expected to go to the Democrats in a state that Biden won by such a significant margin. But obviously, incumbency matters, and ultimately the Republicans are going to win in both of those states. If we look at a couple of other states, let's start with New Mexico. I apologize about that. It's expected that the incumbent, Governor Grissom, I'm sorry about that. I'm struggling with pronunciation today. I apologize. But it is expected that Governor Grissom wins this race, and it's probably going to be on a likely margin for the Democratic Party. Pretty solid victory for them, and I think that's expected in most circumstances. The next few races that we're going to talk about, though, is like Florida, Georgia, and Texas. If we look at Florida, it's expected to go to Ron DeSantis by almost 10 percentage points, and I would believe that. I would totally believe that. Same thing with Georgia, where it's a much closer race, but I do believe at the end of the day, Brian Kemp will win this race by well over 5 percentage points, putting him in that likely margin for the governor's mansion. And as we can tell, there's 24 Republican gubernatorial mansions that I've rated so far that are expected to go to the GOP, which does mean that most likely the Republicans will control the majority of the states in the United States as far as the governor's level goes. But the next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Texas. Greg Abbott has performed pretty well, but Beto O'Rourke is a candidate that we shouldn't underestimate at all. If we look back at 2018, totally different environment though, but he did perform very, very well against Ted Cruz for the United States Senate. Ultimately, he ended up losing, but only by a few percentage points, and honestly, pretty respective race back in 2018 for Beto O'Rourke. So we can't underestimate him, but I do believe that Greg Abbott will most certainly win this race by over 5 percentage points. The next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Pennsylvania. If we look at this state, Josh Shapiro, who is currently doing very well in this race, is expected to win by exactly 10 percentage points, as we see here. And honestly, I would honestly believe that. I do believe Josh Shapiro will win by a pretty solid margin. Now, if polls are off for Dr. Oz, I do believe this could be a closer race for the governor's mansion. But honestly, I do believe that Dr. Oz has a better chance than Doug Mastriano does in the United States Senate versus the gubernatorial race. So I do believe that Josh Shapiro will win this race well over 5 percentage points, which puts him in that categorized race for him to win it by over 5 percentage points in a likely margin. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Kansas. And if we look at this race, I'm honestly kind of shocked by it. Derek Schmidt is not doing as well as I expected him to. Laura Kelly, who is the incumbent governor from this state, is doing much better than he is. And while I'm not sure to believe it or not, obviously we cannot deny the fact that Laura Kelly is doing well, and she's probably going to win. I'm not sure that I believe by these margins, but honestly, I do believe that she will win by over a percentage point, which puts it in the lean Democratic column for the Democratic Party. I do believe that we could talk about a potential tilt, but that's under a percentage point, and honestly, polls just don't predict that. And many other factors don't go into that. I do believe that the Republicans still have a chance in this race, and I don't believe that we should categorize this as a fully Laura Kelly victory. Obviously, Kansas is a pretty solid GOP state, with the exception of the abortion ballot referendum that was on the ballot back a couple of months ago. With the exception of that, the Republicans do very well in the state of Kansas. But it's also like we talked about in Vermont. It's kind of just like that in today's world, where, states that went to Joe Biden are going to go to a Republican and vice versa. States that went to Donald Trump are going to go to a Democrat. I do think it's a little shocking in a year like this year that Kansas would go blue, though. But we can't deny the facts that are here, and those predict that Laura Kelly will win. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Minnesota. If we look at the state, honestly, pretty respective victory for Governor Walz, and I believe he'll win by a pretty solid margin and a likely race in the state of Minnesota. The next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Michigan. And Tudor Dixon is just not doing well in this race. She's been put into a bad situation where she's just not able to perform as well as people may have hoped for her to. I do not believe that Gretchen Whitmer is going to win by 10 percentage points, though. I absolutely do not believe that. Obviously, I could be wrong, but I do not believe that. I do believe Tudor Dixon will lose, but I do believe it will be a much closer race than many pollsters predict, but I do believe it will still be in that likely margin, but I think it'll be closer to 5% than it will to the 10%. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Arizona. And we should probably talk about this last, but I want to go ahead and talk about it, so let's look at it. Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs are facing off against each other. Katie Hobbs being the current Secretary of State of the state of Arizona, I believe. I apologize if I said that wrong. I very well could have. But I do believe Katie Hobbs is currently the Secretary of State. And if we look at this race specifically, Katie Hobbs is refusing to debate Kari Lake. Kari Lake has on multiple times called her out for it. And ultimately, we've seen as Katie Hobbs has been asked about this by multiple people, including I seen a video on Instagram or I believe it was TikTok, I'm sorry about that, just a couple of days ago, where a student went up to Katie Hobbs asking her why she wasn't going to debate Kari Lake, and Katie Hobbs said she was not going to speak to this person. And honestly, I think that's going to hurt her campaign, and I think it already has started. I think Kari Lake will win this race, and I think she'll win it by a lean Republican margin. I don't believe it'll be tilt, but I do believe it'll be a lean Republican margin. And I think that's a pretty respective victory for Kari Lake in a state that, months ago may have been more predicted towards the Democratic Party. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Wisconsin. And if we look at the state, it could be a much closer race than maybe many people predicted. Tony Evers, the current governor of the state, is performing decent, but not as well as he needs to be out of the margin of error in most cases. So if we look at this, Tim Michels might have a shot at winning the governor's mansion in Wisconsin. Right now, obviously not so much predicted, but I do believe that this race will be much closer than people think. And I do believe that this is a race that we could characterize as a tilt Democratic state. And not a lean, a tilt, under a percentage point. And I believe that's honestly true. I believe that honestly Tony Evers will win this race, but it will be by such a slim margin that it won't even get called on election night potentially. So we'll have to see, but currently that's my prediction. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Nevada. Also, another state where I believe that this race is going to be so close. And honestly, I know 538 rates this race as one in which Joe Lombardo will not win it. Steve will be reelected, but I don't believe that. I believe that if Adam Laxalt wins, like I think he will, I believe that it's expected for Joe Lombardo to win this race. And I believe he'll win it very narrowly. I believe it will be by such a small margin to be a tilt margin for the Republican Party, but I do believe that he will win it. The next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Oregon. Also, another very close race. If we look at this recently, it has been expected that this race is going to be much, much closer. And honestly, I buy it. I believe this race will be very close, and I believe that ultimately the Republican, Drazen, will end up winning this race. I know that's shocking. I know that's shocking for many people to believe, but I do believe it. I believe it will be by such a small margin to be in that tilt category for the Republican Party, but I do believe that this is the final map for the for gubernatorial races across the country in 2022, just 4 weeks from now. I believe that this is currently the map that we're looking at. Obviously, I could be wrong, and I will totally admit that if that's the case. But I thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below on specific races such as Wisconsin, Oregon, Kansas, Arizona, Nevada. Races like that are going to be close. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear them down below. I'll be reading them. Even though I may not like them or respond back, I am reading them, I promise you. And I will give my thoughts back if I have the time to do it. But I thank you all so much for watching. Give me video suggestions down below. What do you all want to see? I would love to film videos that you all want to see. But until then, I will see you in the next video.